This is part 2 of ZBrush and the Transpose Line. Before I continue, I wanted to add something that I should have mentioned in the previous part, namely when you duplicate geometry, you cannot have subdivisions. So right now, when I go to geometry, you see my palette, I have no higher res, I have no subdiv. So when I activate the move tool with the W key, W, draw it out, Control, click and drag. I'm also holding the shift key to constrain to that axis as shown before. Then I can drag this out, Control Z to undo. Now when I press Control D so that I have one subdivision level, so my geometry palette you see SDiv 2, lower subdiv, higher subdiv. When I activate the move tool right now and Control click and drag, this is what happens. I'm simply moving the geometry. So when this happens, when you Control click to duplicate with the move tool, or Control Shift to constrain at the same time, and this happens, and you wonder, hey, why I'm not getting a duplicate, you might want to check your subdivision levels. So when you delete lower or delete higher at the lower subdivision level, now you have no subdivisions. When you now Control Shift and click, now you get your duplicate. So this is what I should have mentioned in the previous video. So now we can go on to the next part. In this part, we are going to check out what the Transpose Line can do for you in move mode when holding the Alt key. So I'm pressing the W key for my Transpose Line in move mode, draw out the Transpose Line. When I hold Shift, I constrain to the world axis. And as shown previously, I can manipulate this point, the middle point, the end point to flatten. But when you hold the Alt key, then you get a completely different behavior. So when I, for instance, hold the Alt key and manipulate the inner end circle, now I am doing something completely different than when I simply click and drag this without Alt. So the placement of your Transpose Line is very important. So if I, for instance, want to move this part, that circly part as a whole, then I move my endpoint in front of it, and when I now press Alt and move around, you see that end circle is being moved rigidly, and between the start circle of the Transpose Line and the end circle, you have a fall off like that. So I can increase the fall off, Alt. Oh, and now my start point is here, so I have to click on this circle again to have my start point over there. So this is my end point now. Alt, you see the fall off is bigger now. So when I drag it out from the middle to over there, Alt, you see an even bigger fall off, just like that. And then of course I can increase the fall off and whatever you need, Control Z to undo. Then you can hold Alt with the middle inner circle, so Alt and then click over here. Now I'm manipulating only that part. So again, the part between the start and the end. So when I increase this and hold Alt and click the middle part, you see again different behavior. You have to experiment with this. And in shown previously, when I don't hold Alt and I click the start point, you will flatten. But when you hold Alt, you will see that it's kind of truncating the part in between. It's flattening and kind of truncating the part in between. So Control Z to undo. So without Alt, you're flattening. Go to the side, Control Z to undo. With Alt, Control Z again to undo. So it was the start point that I should handle. So Alt, and the middle part kind of gets flattened and kind of truncated. So Ctrl Z to undo. To recap, without Alt you can manipulate begin, middle and end points. The direction is important. This is with Alt. So again, another behavior. With Alt, without Alt, without Alt, with Alt, with Alt, without Alt. So holding the Alt key with the transpose line, very powerful. In this part we will examine the transpose line in scale mode. So when I press the E key, pressing the E key, I get my transpose line. I can draw out my transpose line, and as shown before, when I press the Shift key, it snaps to world coordinates. Now when I drag the end dot, I will scale. I have X symmetry on, Ctrl Z. So let me turn off X symmetry for now. And you see that it scales, and it scales from the starting point. So when I press Ctrl Z, do it from the top, you see that it scales from here. Ctrl Z. If you turn on symmetry, then you get that overlapping at the middle. So you could position your transpose line in the center. So I'm going to deactivate symmetry for that by pressing the X key. Click on the white circle. Now my transpose line is completely in the middle. I'm going to position it on the X axis and press the X key again to turn on X symmetry. And now when I scale, I will scale from the center. But, oh yeah, because it's completely in the center, it scales okay. Ctrl Z to undo. Now, when I drag the middle inner circle, I will scale along the transpose line. So I can continue to drag, and since it was not at the center, it's from the starting point. So Ctrl Z to undo. Show it like this. So you see it scales on an axis from the starting point. Ctrl Z to undo. So if I want this to be completely in the middle, I could, for example, select my mask lasso tool, make a selection over here, Control click the canvas to invert it, click the white circle to position it completely in the center of that selection, clear my mask, and now scale. And I'm not aligned with my transpose tool, so when I press the red circle, now I'm scaling on the X axis, and that is actually on the YZ plane. So when I go to my top view, you see that it's perfectly on that plane from the center of the arm. So Ctrl Z to undo, and I go to the top again. Or if I want to scale on the Z, for instance, then I click the blue dot, and now I'm scaling on the Z plane. But of course with X symmetry I could make a mask. So mask this part out, blur it a bit, invert the mask and drag the inner circle, invert the mask first, invert the circle. And sometimes you are zoomed out too far, so when I click and drag now, at a certain point I'm going again in the other direction, and you can fix this by zooming in a bit. like that. And you see it has scaled on the YX plane. Ctrl Z to undo. You can also scale from the starting point. So E key for my scale transpose line, drag it out, and now click and drag the inner circle. And again, if you go too far, you go the other direction. So I could zoom in a bit, drag it out again, click the starting point, click and drag, press the F key to frame, and you see that is the result of the scaling. So Ctrl Z. So different behavior if you use the end dot, the middle dot on the transpose line axis, and the starting point. Now, as with the move mode, also with the scale mode, you can use the Alt key to have different behavior. So if I drag the end dot, then this is my scaling. But when I press Alt and drag the end dot, you see that the scaling occurs from the starting point, and the rest is unchanged. So Ctrl Z to undo. If I position my transpose line over here, press the Alt key, drag the end dot, you see now you have kind of a fall off. And of course I can decrease the fall off, and then that last part will scale rigidly like that. Ctrl Z to undo. With the middle part, you can also use the Alt key, and then it will scale on a plane. Now my transpose line is on the X-axis, so it will scale along the YZ plane. So press the Alt key and drag the innermost circle. You see now it scales with a follow from beginning point to end point, but on the plane. And you also have different behavior with the starting point, pressing the Alt key. So without Alt key, this is the behavior. So I'm going to press Shift S to make a snapshot. Ctrl Z to undo. Get my starting point over here. Press the Alt key and now click and drag. And you see the difference without Alt and with Alt. Ctrl Z to undo. Important thing is actually how you draw out your transpose line. Let me give an example. So if I draw out my transpose line like this, press the Alt key and click and drag over here, you see that that part over here is untouched. Ctrl Z to undo. But when I make my transpose line bigger, and another tip, when I'm dragging out, I can also hold the Shift key and then it snap to angles. So you see that I'm holding the Shift key and dragging the end circle, and you see it snap to angles. So another point tip. So when I drag it out like this, and now click and drag, hold the Alt key and click and drag the begin circle, you see that the end part also is affected with a fall off. Let me show the difference when I move this back over here, holding the Shift key to move in a straight line. Alt, you see the end part now is unaffected. So Ctrl Z to undo. So you can modulate the fall off by dragging out the transpose line further. Alt, yeah, a smoother fall off. So again, zoom in a bit. Ctrl Z, and if I want the whole geometry to be affected. Alt, click and drag. So the further you drag out the endpoint, the bigger the fall off will be. And of course it also matters whether you're in all views centered or not, so the scaling will take place from the starting point. And zooming in makes so that I can drag further in one go. So experiment with this, very powerful. Sometimes it can be useful to create extra geometry in order to draw out your transpose line. What do I mean by that? Well, sometimes you take a lot of care in posing or placing your transpose line. So I press the W key, for instance, W for my move tool, and for instance I'm going to put my transpose line from here over there. Now this is a very simple example. Now let's say that I want to invert my transpose line, so I want this to be the starting point. Then I can go over the start circle over here and click on it. See, now my starting point is over here, but when I want to revert that and I accidentally not click on the yellow circle, then I'm drawing out a new transpose line. And this can be very frustrating if you have taken a lot of care in actually posing the transpose line. And what you could do is create helper geometry. So I'm going to go to draw mode and I'm going to duplicate this subtool. So duplicate, and I'm going to initialize it, initialize QSphere. So now I have a sphere, I have solo mode on, so with transparency you see I have my sphere over here. I'm going to deactivate symmetry and press the W key to move my geometry. I'm going to put it over there. Click the white circle to center it, and I'm going to right now, and I'm going to solo mode. Right now you can see that my axes are not aligned to the world axis. A way to fix that is to draw out the transpose line again with holding the shift key. So I'm dragging it out. Now hold the shift key. Now it is aligned with world coordinates, and now when I press the white circle, it's still aligned with world coordinates and centered in that geometry. So solo, off. Now press the E key to scale. So scaling from the center. Press the W key, and I'm going to put it about there. Go to the top view. It's in the center. Okay. So draw out my transpose line again and press the Control key to duplicate, and I'm also going to hold the Shift key to constrain to the axis and drag out with the middle circle to duplicate it. Like that. Press the Q key to go to draw mode. Turn on solo, and you see now I have two spheres, if you like. Going to auto group them. So now when I drag out my transpose line, W, I can start from that point and drag it out to that point, and it snaps to that point if in preferences you have set your snap max distance higher than 0. So then it snaps to those points. Now turn off solo, turn off transparency. Now when I go to my other subtool, the transpose line is still in that place. So now if I were to accidentally drag out my transpose line again, all I have to do is go over here, go into solo mode, and drag simply and zoom in a bit, simply drag it out again, it snaps, go back to this tool, and it's in the exact same spot where I put it before. So this is something I do especially with rotation. So when I have a character and I want to pose it, then I actually put extra joints, extra geometry in there, which will act as joints. So when I go to draw mode, I also give these polygons an extra polygroup. So what I did is I'm making a selection, hiding everything else, press Ctrl W to make that a different subtool, Ctrl Shift click on the canvas, and I'm going to undo and Ctrl W again for another color so it's more obvious. And I even could delete that other geometry, and so now, but that's not really necessary anyway. When you drag out like this, the transpose line is now in the exact same spot as I drew it out before. Go to the other subtool, and now it's again in the exact same spot. Of course, when you are going to scale and rotate, then you should also put your helper geometry in the same subtool. Otherwise, when I, for instance, go to this one, press the R key to rotate, and rotate is something we will which I will show you later on. So when I rotate now and I turn off solo, and where, oh, my subtool isn't visible, so you see the helper geometry doesn't follow. So if you want to have your helper geometry act as a joint, you should place your helper geometry, of course, in the same subtool as the subtool that you are working on or posing. So helper geometry can be very useful if you want to make sure to draw out the transpose line exactly where you want it. And the last mode is rotate mode. So when I press the R key, I'm going to rotate mode, and I'm pressing the Q key again to go to draw mode. I'm first going to show you that I have placed helper geometry just like shown before. So when I hide these polygroups, you see that I have created extra joints. So I could draw out my transpose line, snap it over there, Ctrl Shift click the canvas to unhide everything. Now when I rotate from the end inner circle, this is what you get. You rotate from the beginning over here to the end. So when I put my transpose line somewhere else, then I will rotate from there, or when I put it over here, I will rotate from there. Q key to go to draw mode and hide my geometry again. And another way to hide it, I could also make a selection, press Ctrl Shift A to select all attached geometry, and now press Ctrl Shift and click and drag to invert my selection. Press the R key and drag out my transpose line again. Press Ctrl Shift click to unhide the rest. Now when I middle click and drag, click and drag the inner circle of the middle part, I'm going to rotate along the axis like that. Ctrl Z to undo. And I can also click and drag the starting point, and I will actually reverse the direction as if this from there it's actually the same, but from the other part. And with the rotate tool, you can also use the Alt key, just like with the move transpose mode and the scale transpose mode. So when I press the Alt key, and I want to make that the endpoint, so the endpoint Alt and then click and drag. Now I'm rotating with a fall off, just like with move and scale. Control Z. So I could put it over here, Alt, have a different fall off. So if I want my last part to stay rigid, I can reposition the transpose line just like that. And again, Control Shift A, invert, drag out my transpose line in rotate mode, unhide my geometry, Control Shift click. Now if this was an arm and that the hand, then I could twist that arm. So I'm going to drag out, and this is what regularly happens, and that is why I have created the helper geometry. So I accidentally drew out a new transpose line. So I'm going to press Control Z. So I'm going back to over here, draw out my transpose line again, Control Shift click, so it's in the exact same spot. Zoom out, make sure that I'm hovering over the circle, drag out transpose line. I'm in rotate mode, so when I now hold Alt and click and drag, and I'm going to zoom in a bit because the movement is a very, so I'm holding, oh, sometimes you have to drag out often to get to where you want. So this is how I can twist the arm, if you will. Control Z, sorry. So now that geometry has been twisted, I'm going to press Control Z a couple of times. So I have to drag out my transpose line further away, because if I do it over here and now hold the Alt key and click the middle circle, I'm only twisting that geometry and the hand does not follow. So drag out transpose line, maybe to there, hold the Alt key, and if you place the middle circle at the end of the hand, it goes faster than when I drew out the transpose line further out. So that is how you could twist the arm. And remember, with the helper geometry, if you accidentally put your transpose line somewhere else, it's very easy to put it back where it was. Click, Control Shift click, and it's back over there. So all I have to do is drag out my transpose line again to there. That's not a lot of work, but Alt click and I can rotate my arm again like that. And you can also Alt click the start point, and then I have the inverse then with the Alt key and my endpoint. So if I were to mask this part, Alt key, if I were to drag out like that, or the other way around like that, I'm doing kind of the same thing as with Alt. But no, it's not the same thing, sorry about that. You again have the fall off. So with Alt, a good thing to remember is that you kind of have a fall off. So when I put that over there, now I have less of a fall off, and when I put this over there, then I have more fall off, as you can see. So it's not the same thing as doing this or doing that. Alt always actually kind of works with the fall off with the length of the transpose line. Oops, it's a bit far. So you see the end part is unaffected with Alt because my other point is over there. So Alt always acts kind of as a fall off. And this is because my transpose line is not in the center. Okay, Alt, see, just like that. So Alt acts like a fall off with the length of the transpose line. With Alt, without Alt, it's rigid. Something I wanted to add is the following. You have seen me often change the direction of the transpose line. So right now my axes are on that circle. So this is my start point and that is my end point. So when I click on the circle, I invert it. Now I believe that with scale and rotate, the start and end point are not that important. They are actually with the move transpose mode. So when I press W key, now this is my start point. When I press the Alt key and click and drag, you see that is my behavior. When I click the circle, now that is my start point. So when I click now Alt on the end point, I get something else. So the direction of the transpose line in move mode is important. But when I go, for instance, to scale mode by pressing the E key, now over here you have your start point. Press the Alt key and I get that as a result. Now after having done that, I have my start point over here. So when I press Alt with the end point, I get the exact same behavior. So Shift S to make a snapshot, Control Z to undo. Oh, and I'm going to press Control N, Control Shift Z to redo, Shift S, drag it over here, Control Z. So Alt, and if I make that the starting point, Alt, you see it's the same behavior. So with the move tool, it is important where your begin and end points are. So W for move, Alt, and you see it kind of truncated it, Control Z, and when the other part, oops, other part is my starting point, Alt, Control Z, now that's Alt. So with the move tool, the direction is important. With scale and rotate, it is not important.